Una Fem Ciència, una sèrie fonamental per repensar el feminisme, la història i la cultura científica. Comencem! Avui contem amb Catherine Jami, investigadora al Centre Nacional de Recerca Científica de França. La seva investigació es centra en la història de les matemàtiques en el context xinès a principis de l'època moderna. És la història de la ciència i la tecnologia sexista?
The history of science and technology is an academic discipline, so it's an institution. It is like all the societies in which it is practiced in societies that we know are fundamentally sexist in their structure and organization. So as such, it is bound to reproduce the bias of the society. On the other hand, I think there's quite a lot of, critical work that's been done within history to try and, put, shed light on these biases and try to counter them. So I think the discipline is, I would say, no more virtuous or bad than the others. It's really a matter of what we want to make it now and what means we have to make it a little less biased, I would say.
Com s'hauria de commemorar la ciència? Què n'opines del Dia Internacional de la Dona i la Nena a la Ciència?
The word commemorate for me is interesting because the bell it rings is something of the past and it goes with memory. And for me, memory is, I would say, almost in opposition with history. And very often you have to construct history, especially history of science, against memory. If you look at the memory of science, say, the list of Nobel Prizes, then, that for me is commemoration. But we historians are going to look at, were there no women at all for all these decades and why didn't they get the prize? So in a sense, commemorating is not obviously something that concerns history. I think it is important to just keep talking about the presence of women in science, because what we know is not that there have never been any women in science until 50 years ago. There have always been. But the problem is invisibility. And again, in science and technology as elsewhere in our societies. So in a sense, it's important work to have this International Day and to just have a chance to say, okay, today we're going to talk about this. There are also, teams of people, and one can join on a voluntary basis that endeavor, for example, to add more articles on women and on women scientists in Wikipedia. So there are many, many ways that one can make women visible in science, and commemoration is one way it can be done.
Molts autors i autores destaquen el paper de la ciència en la construcció i consolidació dels imperis. Quin paper juguen les matemàtiques?
Well, I think it goes both ways. That, yes, the sciences participate to the construction of empires, at least in the early modern age. But it also seems that empires are very good for the circulation of science. I wonder what we would know about Greek science, what there would be about Greek science without Alexander the Great and his conquests, for example, to take an example that no one talks about much. Greek science seems to be something taken for granted, but think of the proportion of it that was created in Alexandria, for example. And, well, the other way around, at least for the early modern and modern ages, mathematical sciences in a broad sense were important because they were really at the foundation of, everything that was navigational science, geography, astronomy, all these that were really necessary for just sailing out, to say nothing of, directly military technology. One of the subjects that the Jesuits introduced into China in the service of the Qing emperors was ballistics, right? So that is a mathematical science, certainly. So yes, the connection is very narrow, I think.
Part de les teves investigacions es centren en la transmissió de les ciències matemàtiques d'Europa a Xina als inicis de l'època moderna. Aquesta transmissió està estretament vinculada a la missió jesuïta. Com va funcionar l'estreta interrelació entre les matemàtiques i la religió en aquest període?
In the case of the Jesuits in China, imperialism, I would say, is what took them there, because they sailed on Portuguese ships when basically Portugal had been allocated the Eastern Hemisphere for its expansion and evangelization. This being said, for the Jesuits, I would say mathematical science were not just a tool. There were more than that. In Jesuit education, mathematical training was something that prepared your mind for theology, for the understanding of God, because it helped you also understand nature as God had made it. So there was a deep belief, at least in the first Jesuits who went to China, that it was impossible to dissociate science and knowledge from the Christian revelation. Someone like Leibniz in the late 17th century also wrote to say things similar to this, that basically the secrets of times and the heavens are especially disclosed to Christians. So it's not a matter of few conservative religious people. It was just I think a widely shared conviction that Christians had a privileged status for the sciences.
Les dones tenien accés a l'aprenentatge occidental dels jesuïtes a Xina en aquest període?
Well, as elsewhere, it's extremely difficult to find traces of women involvement in these sciences, at least for China, which is really the place I know best. I would say two things. Firstly, one could have access to books by Jesuits in China if one had access to the literary culture. So that's one thing. We're talking about elite women. And if they had learned enough classical Chinese as opposed to the vernacular language in order to be able to read these. To the best of my knowledge, there is one woman astronomer in China in the 18th century. There have been work about, she has written, and there has been some research about her work, but she's just like the one that you always want to quote if you want to quote somebody. So women had access when they were elite and when they were in families that thought teaching the classics and to girls was worth it.
Quin rol juguen les matemàtiques en la societat actual?
Well, it's difficult to answer in general terms. I could say, what role do mathematics play in French society? So I think if you leave aside the impact of science on society, which is huge, what I see is mainly in education. In France, it is still the case that mathematics is thought to be a test of your intelligence. And mathematicians have got a huge influence. For example, there has been yet another reform of the curriculum in high school. And recently, a few months ago, the French mathematical community has started to, make its voice heard, saying this is scandalous. There is now much too little mathematics in the curriculum. And almost instantly, the minister said, "Oh, we're going to put some more back into it." I cannot imagine this happening with biologists. So they have a great impact, but that is because mathematics is thought to be a measure of intelligence. And personally, I think it's a disaster because first, measuring the intelligence of children is a very dubious enterprise that will mostly result in crushing many intelligences. And secondly, no one tells children, look, math is fun, which it can be and it should be. So great prestige of mathematics, I think, in fact, keeps a number of people away from it. And, when I tell people I have studied mathematics, they put on a polar face and say, oh, I've always been bad at maths, when you feel what a lost opportunity that they could not have fun.
Actualment és investigadora sènior al Centre Nacional d'Investigació Científica de França i també ha ocupat un important càrrec a la Unió Internacional d'Història i Filosofia de la Ciència i la Tecnologia. Com afecta el gènere a les posicions de poder?
The first way that gender affects position of powers is that there are still far, fewer women than men in this position. If we take the International Union of History of Science and Technology, I was involved with the Division of History of Science and Technology. 20 years ago, I attended a General Assembly where officers were being elected. And I would say I was naive, I was a newcomer. And when the list of candidates was being discussed, I stood up and said, it's absolutely scandalous. There are only 4 women amongst the candidates. There were probably a slot of 20 or 25 candidates. Surely we can do better than this. And the president replied to me, well, this is an improvement. Last time there were no women candidates at all. Right, 2013, I became the first woman Secretary General. And okay, now my successor is also a woman. For the first time last year, a president-elect who is a woman was elected. So things are changing there, but it's horribly slow. It's really horribly slow. And I also note that, one of the problems is that, because of the pyramid, there are very few women near the top. And so everybody goes to them and asks them to be on committee, to do things. And they can't do everything, so that there is a real problem there.
Quin tipus de polítiques públiques poden promoure i estimular la consolidació de la carrera científica de les dones?
I think that members of recruitment committees need to be trained. One needs to be trained, and I have done this. I have also undergone some training, but looking at videos and discussing the matter with other committee members, because the sexist person is not, the nasty man next to you. It's yourself, right? It's how we react. So it's, for example, learning not to follow your first reaction and instinct to one person, not just giving excessive importance to how good and comfortable they are talking when they are in a slightly stressful situation. I think in this regard, for example, I was, amongst recruitment committees for CNRS. And 2 years ago, of course, we switched from in-person interview to Zoom interviews. And this was amazing because we found that it really, first, young people are much more comfortable than we are with Zoom. And secondly, it also, I think, gave better equality amongst candidates, because those who are more fluent, those who speak more loudly, this didn't matter so much anymore, because everybody can see the candidate and hear them very well, and we just have to listen to what they have to say. And so I think, okay, this is an example of, how a bias can be diminished. I think that really being cautious at every stage of recruitment, assessment, promotion is very, very important. And again, this is not necessarily achieved by just having, a certain rate of women on a committee. But so it's really a matter of, taking this into account, I would say, every day, all the time. Another thing which I think is important is also something that would be mentoring or encouraging women, because often when it comes to promotion, when we examine the applications, we find that women had waited before they applied, so that their achievements were in many cases much more substantial than those of men who were applying for the same promotion. Men were a bit younger, but it's because no one had told women, 5 years earlier, hey, if you were a man, you would be applying. And so just go ahead and apply.
Merci beaucoup, Catherine. Aquest ha estat l'últim episodi de la segona edició de Fem Ciència. Recordeu que podeu trobar tots els vídeos disponibles al canal de YouTube de la Societat Catalana d'Història de la Ciència i la Tècnica. Moltes gràcies i fins aviat!